is Naman Patel. I'm going to be going over data visualizations and sort of the whole process of inputting the data, selecting the proper visualization, and then going on to format that visualization as well. So just to start off, a little bit about the basics of data visualizations. One of the main things that you want to keep in mind is definitely mindful of the data that you're choosing to represent. So for example, is your data going to be more relevant with a bar representation, or what about a line graph or a stacked bar? Furthermore, you want to use formulas if there's math involved. So for example, if two cells or two rows addition or some mathematical operation between them yields a third one, for example, even an average, then you would want to use a formula in order to populate that entire row. And again, recall the function section from earlier with help in how to do this. So now let's start with inputting the data. So inputting the data, you can enter the data into any part of a blank workbook, which is equivalent to just sort of making a virtual table. If you have any headers you want to give, for example, like price versus quantity, you can go ahead and do that in that part of entering the data, just on top of the selected row or column that you want to do it in. Another important thing in inputting the data is to be sure to distinguish the different parts of your data. So for example, are you in your head, are you planning that one of the attributes is going to be on the x-axis and one on the y? You can't just all write that in one section, so then you would have to go ahead and split those up, as well as using different groups for a stacked bar chart or other specific details that are specific to your graph. Also, remember that you can highlight through cells using that formula feature in order to apply it to multiple cells at once. So just something useful to keep in mind if you're going to do that sort of thing in your inputting your data. So after we've inputted the data and it exists on our workbook, we have to go ahead and create a graph. Now keep in mind that right after I go over this quick demonstration verbally, we're going to go through one or two graphs ourselves. So don't worry about the demo part for now, but just sort of kind of try to follow along right now. So in creating the graph, if you go to the insert, which we intuitively go to for inserting our chart, you'll see on the top that there's a recommended charts feature. Now this is a very helpful feature of spreadsheets that actually provides recommended visualizations based on the data that you've highlighted. So I definitely recommend looking at this, and you can see previews of each graph in the pop-up bar. Secondly, we have to the right of that, we have the smaller graph icons that allow the user to actually manually select the type of graph that they want. And this could also use sometimes, for example, if you want a specific one or it doesn't show up in that one or whatever the case may be. Now, in terms of formatting the visualization, there's a couple important things that we need to keep in mind. So first of all, we definitely want to add axes and title. And the way we do this is once you have the chart showing up on your Excel screen, you can highlight the default title and just retype that in right there. And in order to get to this picture that we see on the right, which allows us to modify the axes titles and chart titles and data labels and whatnot, we would navigate to chart design, and then on the leftmost side, you would see add chart element, and when you click on it, this pops up and you can go ahead and insert any of these attributes. Furthermore, right clicking on the graph gives many options itself, and this allows you to change graph color and text format if you double click on it. In fact, if you double click, what you see here on the left will show up, which comes from format chart area if you right click on the picture of the graph. In this other useful hot button, we have change chart type. So for example, if you have a bar chart and you want to see what it would look like as a pie chart or a line graph, you can go ahead and use that in order to just get a look at what that would be. So those are just a couple helpful details. And before going into our actual demo, I want to go over one last thing, which is what makes a good visualization, So one of the main things obviously is that it's visually clear and uncluttered. So we don't want to see a lot of unnecessary information, and we don't want necessary information to be blocked off or cut off with other things. So we need to make sure all the important elements we have, for example, a scale, legend, or an axis, these are all in the graph and they're able to be seen. Secondly, as touched upon earlier, we need to have axes and title labels with units if necessary in a readable font so that our viewers can see what this visualization is actually trying to get across, and it serves its purpose essentially. And lastly, we want to make sure that we have the correct visualization choice. So for example, we have to make sure that we're using a pie chart if we're trying to show the parts of a whole, a line graph for change over time, or if we're comparing different numerical values, a bar chart. Okay, so enough talking. Let me move on over to the Excel workbook and we can go over how to make one of these graphs ourselves. So let's start with the bar graph. So let's assume that I want to make an arbitrary graph of price and quantity. Let's say price, let's give the values of 10, 15, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. And then on the quantity side, we'll just go ahead and put 1 through 5. Put 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now, like we talked about earlier, I go ahead and highlight all of this. And then I navigate over to insert. Here, now let me go over this recommended charts button that I was talking about earlier. Here I can see possible recommended charts that Excel is showing me. So let's say I like this first one, which serves my purpose of having the quantity and whatnot. I can see this. I'll expand it. Go ahead and change this title to, for example, price versus quantity. Just like we can just highlight the default one and change that. And then now I can navigate over. I'm in chart design because I'm clicked on the graph right now. I can go over to add chart element, go to my axes titles, add a primary horizontal, and at the same time I'll just go ahead and add my primary vertical. In which case now all I have to do is the same thing. To change the actual titles of the axes, I just need to go highlight it and change this to, I would go ahead and change this to price, and then over here I'd go ahead and change that to be my quantity. So now I have my two axes labeled as well as my title. Now there are a couple cool things that we can do with this. If we go to our add chart element, we can go ahead and have data labels, and once you hover over data labels, you see this new pop-up of 6 or so options where you can choose where you want to have your data labeled. So let's say I put outside end. So then I can see my y-axis value on top of each of my bars, which is just a cool trick to do if you're giving a presentation or anything like that. And you might have noticed that when I pulled up a chart, this thing came up on the right, which is the format chart area. There's two buttons, the chart options and text options, and clicking on each of them allows you to modify them respectively. So great, we saw an example of a bar chart. But before ending this demo, I want to also go over, let's just say, one more type of graph. So let's now say we want to do a line graph, right? So let me go ahead and re-input data. So let's say that arbitrary data is, let's say this is months, so a time frame, because in line graphs we show change over time. And I'll say this is price. Let's say we're trying to model the price of a certain stock. So for months, I'll have 1, and then 2, 3, 4. Let's do it over 4 months. And for price, I can go ahead and say, let's assume that it's recovering from some economic downturn. So the price has steadily been going up from, let's say, 34 to 43 and then 47, and now it's resting at 54, right? So again, we've inputted the data, we highlight it, and we navigate over to our recommended charts to see a line graph should come up. Yep, see? So it's right here. It's in our line graph over here. We can extend this, and then first thing I do is change this again. Let's say price of stock Y over 4 months. And again, I'm in chart design, so I can go over to my chart elements, and then I add each of my axes that I want. Over here, my horizontal one, I'll go ahead and put months for the time reference. And then for my vertical one, I'll have price in dollars. Oops. Price in dollars. And yeah, now I have the basic working chart again, but there's another couple cool things specific to line graph that we can do, which we can see we can add what's called a trend line, and we can go ahead and put, let's say, linear, and we can kind of see how closely our given data resembles a linear trend line. Another cool thing that we can do here is we can also have error bars if we have a bar chart, but obviously that doesn't apply here. We can also see grid lines. We can see grid lines, so we can see the individual units as well. And just some other cool things there are a lot of cool things that we can look through with the add chart element. So depending on the type of graph that you're trying to do, definitely look through those, because they'll offer some graph specific or data specific things that you can do that might make your visualization more clear. But other than that, yeah, we've gone over how to go over the inputting data, creating our own visualization, and then going on to format it. And we have the tools to know what makes a good one. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. My email is on the Decal website. But other than that, hope you guys have learned something and have fun making visualizations.